Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Stephanie Cernera. I'm a member of the Postdoc and Student Committee of the BCI Society. And this is our third career advice panel. And these panels are really to offer practical career advice to trainees. And this panel will focus on finding a career in the BCI or neurotech field. And our panelists today are really awesome and have kind of created their own space in the BCI field and are entrepreneurs. So you'll definitely learn about skills necessary to be a successful entrepreneur in the neurotech field. Additionally, these panels are to expand awareness for trainees of possible career paths in BCI. So I encourage you, if you're a trainee in BCI looking for a career or just interested in the field in general, to please use the Zoom Q&A function. I'll do my best to get to those questions throughout the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Adam Seffler, the co-founder and president of NTX Services, and Nick Halper, the CEO of NeuroMatch. And Dr. Cruz is running a little late due to travel issues, but she'll be here as soon as possible. So thank you both for being here and attending our career panel. We're excited to have you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure. And I'll start with an easy first question. Could you please tell us a bit about your background, education, and career path until now? When and where did you join the BCI field, and what is your current role in the BCI field? And we can start with Nick.
Sure. So my name is Nick Halper. I guess to kind of answer these in reverse order, I joined the BCI field approximately 12 years ago or something like that. It's hard to say like when you joined the field, right? Like it's like you're kind of in the field in your educational career as a student, and then moving into industry, then it felt like I was more truly maybe part of the field, so to say. But yeah, on that subject, my educational background, I got an undergraduate degree in neuroscience, chemistry, and biology. And that's actually where I stopped. I was going to go to medical school, decided I didn't actually like medical school, like wasn't the right thing for me. And ended up joining a company in the meantime called BlackRock Microsystems, now called BlackRock Neurotech. So that was really kind of like my entry point, though I'd really started exploring it significantly before that. There was a reason I ended up there. And I really saw a position in that company for several years before I joined.
Okay, and in my case, I'll go in order. So I'm a bit of a different background than a couple of people in the field. I'm a CPA and CFA by trade, which are two financial designations. I have a graduate degree in accounting. I didn't work in accounting for long, though. I actually started my career more on the corporate finance side. So it's helping companies when they want to raise funds, determining company valuations. I also advised in corporate restructuring matters. So back in 2008, when the financial crisis happened, I ended up working with banks in the US trying to figure out, if we could help them see a little more clearly on company projections and what was going to happen there. I switched after also working in the hedge fund space for a couple of years to management consulting. So I worked at McKinsey in Montreal and New York for a couple of years. I also built a strategy department for a financial advisory firm after that. Essentially leading projects with very large institutional investors and big companies across different industries. And I joined the BCI field in 2017. So I was very interested by the brain. I was supporting a mental health foundation. So everything about the brain, mental health, and different disorders was truly fascinating to me. And I was asked essentially by NeurotechX, which was already the largest international community back then, can you help us as a not-for-profit think about how we can raise money and how we can kind of structure ourselves for the future? So I became a board member of NeurotechX. I've been supporting NeurotechX as a community, but that also inspired me because when I saw the talent there was in the community and the amount of challenges that startups, scale-ups, strategic companies or investors have in the field, I was really driven by the idea of starting what is now NTX Services, which is essentially a one-stop shop advisory group. So we do consulting, recruiting, we're going to do transactional services, and we work with companies and investors in the field to support them in whatever question and whatever challenge they might have.
Thank you both so much. I really like that both of you have these really distinct pathways to neurotechnology. Were there any resources that kind of led you into this pathway, or helped you become aware of neurotechnology or BCI?
Nick, I don't know if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I can try to go first. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of hard to define maybe specific resources. I think a lot of what attracted me to the field really was the like availability and access to, I guess I would say, like lab publications. And I don't just mean like scientific publications by that, but like, you know, laboratories that actually go ahead and try to promote their work in a way where they're like interacting with the community and talking about the work that they do, like with quote unquote normal people and not just like scientists who are already like interested in that field. Honestly, that was what brought me into it. I had kind of like had this like peripheral interest. There's a reason I was looking for those types of like resources, but it was really a more digestible way for somebody who was like young and relatively like disconnected from that industry, especially given the university that I was at, to be able to learn more about it and, you know, be interested in getting interacting with it. And then also, you know, giving me a path for people to actually like talk to about it and understand like what they were working on and who they were working with. Because otherwise it feels a little bit amorphous. And by having those types of resources, like, oh, I can talk to this lab, this university does it. There's a research group here that does it. They work with this company. They use this equipment. And that made it way more digestible.
Yeah, I mean, I arrived in the field. I'm not gonna say by a fluke, but like I was referred by someone. I saw the opportunity and I wanted to be in it. But you know, if I think about what NeurotechX does, I mean, the goal as the largest community in the field is really to promote neurotechnology and to give access to people at different skills. And it's interesting because initially when we started, you know, 2015, actually before my time, it was more, I would say, student, graduate degree, some professionals. And today it's actually kind of a third of, you know, startup founders, some executives of neurotech companies, some investors. We have, I would say experienced researchers. Then we have kind of the graduate level, more profiles, and we have also kind of younger and undergrad. So we have a bit of everything. So the way we try to promote neurotech through that is, you know, we have our neurotech Slack, we have chapters in different cities, we have student clubs in different universities. We publish a lot of content. So we have a neurotech primer book available on Amazon for free, actually. We have a lot of educational content. We have a newsletter. So beyond, you know, I'm happy to share some of the information later, but I would say from the community aspect, as Nick said, because you need to actually talk to people, and from the educational aspect, which, you know, can also allow you to get, you know, stronger and understand what the field actually is about. We try to have that balance and allow people to learn. But it's interesting though, because if we go back to the beginning, a lot of the, you know, some of the startups that ended up making it in the field started because of those first chapters, that they just had the opportunity to meet their co-founder sometime. So even though it's more structured today, I think even back in the days, it's exactly what Nick said, which is people actually trying to meet. You know, NTX chapters were one way to do it. There were many others. There were other meetups, but I think that was really what enabled quite a few of the companies that made it to, again, meet their co-founders, meet some employees. I mean, the field was quite under the radar for a while. So this helped a lot.
Definitely. And you kind of answered this question a little bit, but would you both, I guess, how did these resources inspire your current pursuits? So both NTX services and NeuroMatch, and then can you share some more information about these tools and I guess share how trainees can potentially become involved in these organizations like the student chapters?
Yeah, I think being able to see how big of a effect these types of resources had, and to touch on like what Adam said, which is like, yes, getting into a field like this, or really, I mean, almost any form of opportunity comes in the form of like connecting with other people. I mean, that's the kind of like driving vision behind NeuroMatch, is just connecting people with people to help form those type of opportunities and allow people access to those networks. So yeah, it heavily informs not just, you know, why I was interested in getting involved with NeuroMatch, but also a bit what NeuroMatch actually does, whether that be our community events and our matching algorithms and how we kind of partner people with each other. If I'm kind of like talking about resources that exist outside of NeuroMatch, I'd recommend NeurotechX, but I guess that's kind of cheating. He's right here.
There are no shameless plugs today, Nick. It's good.
But I think Yeah, I think if you're looking for those types of resources of getting to like meet and connect with people, a lot of universities who are involved in the field will actually have their own kind of like student groups, and these might overlap. For example, something that NeurotechX does, or even something that kind of like NeuroMatch does as far as community building goes. But because they're like more locally oriented and connected directly to like the professors, PIs, academics there, it's a good way to kind of like get involved with and interact with those. And this works even if you're remote from that university. Oftentimes there's ways to like access their newsletters or talk to them somehow. So this can be a good way to kind of connect into those types of communities as well.
And I guess really quickly, can you share more about this matching algorithm? Like, is it between different trainees or is it between kind of anyone that's in the BCI field?
Yeah, we use it in all sorts of contexts. So we use it primarily in our programs. So we have our academy program where students go through a summer school together. And we use our algorithm to match students based off of their research interests, off of their like time zone, languages that they speak. So we use it in all sorts of kind of like ways to partner students with each other that are likely to work well together and collaborate well. But we also use it in more general contexts. You'll see NeuroMatch show up at other conferences, for example, where we facilitate and run in-person or remote matching events, where we partner scientists into small groups based off of their research interests again. And so we can identify people who are likely to be good collaborators by excluding people who are kind of like directly working on the exact same thing. So collaborators you already have on a paper or something, and letting you touch with people who are just a little bit outside of what you're working on. We find that kind of facilitates collaboration the best.
Thank you.
Sure. And I mean, for what we provide, I mean, for what NeurotechX provide, I mean, either sending an email to info@neurotechx.com or going on the NeurotechX website. We try to have everything kind of laid out in terms of the student clubs we have, the chapters. There's a Neurotech database we created with our partner BrainMind, which essentially is around, I think, 2,000 companies in the field laid out based on their applications, their technologies, and so on. So there are quite a lot of tools out there. And I think Nick is spot on, right? I mean, if you're a student, for example, we have NeurotechX student clubs in university, but not just that, right? Different universities have different clubs, different initiatives, and we're also seeing some of them being more specialized, and that's actually quite inspiring, right? We're seeing more groups being about neuroethics, specifically about hardware in universities and beyond, and that also shows that the field is not where it was before. Before, just saying you're a neurotechnology club was a big thing in itself. We're now seeing little niches here and there. So based on your interests, people might be surprised just by looking online that sometimes there are, you know, very small groups, potentially very aligned with their interests that are emerging in different areas.
And then I know you kind of just mentioned this briefly, but where can trainees become aware of these careers in the BCI or neurotech field? I know you both have listings on both NeurotechX and NeuroMatch, but I guess if you can give more details or maybe other areas that students can look to find these careers.
Yeah, I think the job market is hard. Like it kind of depends on where you're looking, right? If you're trying to look in academia, I think the job market is really hard to navigate. And I think one of the things NeuroMatch has as a goal is to make that navigation a little bit easier. That's why we want to do some of this matching, is to kind of partner scientists who would work well together. And that includes trainees with mentors, whether that be kind of like a PI style mentor who like mentors a grad student, or whether that just be people that you'd look to collaborate with, or postdocs finding jobs in labs and things like that. Industry becomes a little bit easier to navigate. But you can't exactly just like log into LinkedIn and search like engineer and be lucky enough to like find a BCI company. There's no like neurotech filter on Indeed. And so I'd really try to look to like society or like club-based groups. So like NeurotechX's job boards are like a super clear option, I think, for neurotechnology specific stuff. But you can also look for job boards in like different society groups. Sometimes, for example, Society for Neuroscience might allow you to look for jobs that can be filterable by neurotechnology. So I'd say those are some of the approaches I would typically use.
Yeah, and EuroTechX.com. I mean, if you look at the job board on our website, so first of all, we've automated a lot of it, created some algorithms to pick up based on very specific keywords. We screen them also after that to make sure they're proper jobs in the field. Academia and industry are also present, from undergrads to experienced professionals. We even have people looking for co-founders sometimes. And yeah, we actually go because we have, again, our database of companies in the field. So we also essentially track what they're posting. And on top of it, we have specific companies working with us to kind of post different opportunities. But then it happened also in the past that they posted solely on our job board to keep it a bit more specific to our community. So I think Nick is absolutely right. If you want to go at neuroscience, be on neurotech, or if you have specific areas, you might want to look for that. But if you're curious in general about what neurotechnology has to offer, we do have a job board which is fairly extensive, and what we're going to deploy down the line is user profiles within EuroTechX. So anyone that's really interested in not only accessing some of our premium resources on the educational side, but wants to be apprised and get alerts as soon as the jobs that match their skill sets are out there, we will also make that available, because our job board is already there in a way, right? So we're just going to make it a bit more automated. But multiply your chances, right? Whether Neuromatch or NeurotechX or other societies. I mean, we're very happy with what we do, but I mean, as a student or even as an experienced person, there's no reason not to look in different places. So,
And I guess the last little piece I'd add is there's a fun statistic out there that says that 85% of jobs are filled via networking instead of job applications. I don't know how true that actually is, but
Just here.
I would definitely encourage you to like follow companies that you're interested in working with, or labs you're interested in working with, and monitor them for jobs that are upcoming, or ask whether jobs are going to be upcoming. Because a lot of times, if you can try to secure some interest or build a relationship before it even goes out, that's your like best bet for securing one.
Definitely. And I feel like you two are probably definitely great at networking. I guess, do you have suggestions for trainees how to maybe become better at networking, or how to get over maybe uncomfortableness, or it can be scary to talk to
yeah.
people in industry or academia. Do you have any advice for trainees in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Maybe I'll add more pressure on interns or not. I don't know on different people listening, but have a clear purpose. I mean, why do you want to meet someone? What are you going to ask them specifically? Because I think the more senior you go, especially if you just want to be like, hey, talk to me about your career, someone will be like, look, I just don't have the time. If you see a connection, if you've read about their company, as Nick said, if you follow what they have, if there's a clear objective and something that also maybe you can bring to them, talk about what you're doing, talk about how you could help them on a project. Maybe you might even want to volunteer depending on who they are. That can really help a conversation. So target the right people. Mass emails, in my mind, or mass connections are not as valuable as I know the type of person I'm looking for. Let me find them and let me write to them individually. The message doesn't have to be long, but it's important to show that you actually have a clear purpose and you know why you want to talk to them. If it just feels like, I'm a young individual interested in learning more by experienced people in the field, so I'm just gonna, poke everyone that I can on Slack or on LinkedIn or whatever. People are gonna see through this, right? If it just sounds like a kind of a mass reach out versus something very tailored and relevant. And if you do get that meeting, I would encourage to be prepared. Like, know what you're asking, look at the person's background. Don't just make them repeat something that you could have easily found on LinkedIn or ResearchGate or on anything else. Try to make the most out of that.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. When I first kind of like started connecting with people, like I'd get people, or like, started kind of like making some headway in this field, I would get people who would reach out to me sometimes with these more kind of like generic requests, and I would answer those because I wasn't getting that many of them. Like, yeah, I can chat to you about my experience in the field. It's fine. And then you start getting like 50 of those a day, and suddenly it's like not sustainable anymore. And now you kind of like need that specifics of like, I'm asking you this specific thing, or I need help with this thing, or finding a way to kind of like connect on some deeper level is like much better at facilitating that. So yeah, I really have like no other kind of like additional way to extend that besides saying like, also go into networking without thinking about just your ask, right? Like, a lot of networking is about just connecting with other people because you are, providing them something, whether that be like an opportunity or, sharing a resource with them or, whatever it might be. The kind of last piece I would give is that, when you're thinking about networking in person, for example, which is like these mixers at SFN or like wherever you are, I think during those opportunities, it's important to remember too, like everybody there kind of feels a little bit scared and nervous about like trying to connect with somebody. They're all hopeful that they can find somebody they're going to connect with. And so everybody's like just waiting for the same thing that you are. And so if you can be bold and kind of like reaching out in those, it's like good to know that people are receptive. Typically they're there for a reason.
Definitely. And there are a few questions in the chat. So Dr. Allison just wanted to say, in addition to NTX, if you want to meet and connect, I'd recommend the BCI Society. Same, me too. And then, is the NeuroMatch algorithm available for the public to use for finding collaborators? It sounds interesting for academics or research.
So it is technically publicly available because everything we do is open source. You can copy it and use it. But you need people who are inputting data into the actual like database you're going to use to match. And there's not like some open website where you just like type in your details and get matched with people yet. It's something that you can encounter at like NeuroMatch conference, for example, or the conferences that we serve. But our goal is to move towards making that like an accessible resource for helping people find academic jobs.
And then another one just came in. How can newly graduated undergrads get further involved with careers in neurotechnology?
I mean, I feel like, oh, go ahead, Adam.
No, go ahead, Nick.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, I don't feel like there's anything particularly special or not special about being a newly graduated undergrad versus a newly graduated PhD when trying to look for careers in industry, for example. Of course, this like your degree path really changes where you might sit in academia and what function you might serve in a lab. But all sorts of labs are looking for technician type people and post-bachelor's people as well. So yeah, I mean, I guess I would say the same way that anybody else would, which is like accessing some of these resources, looking for potential career opportunities, finding jobs that kind of like match your skill set and interest. I will say that like I would promote like diversity of exploration if you can score internships places, whether that's in a lab or not, and kind of like build up a network of people that you've interacted with. That'll kind of like elucidate or like divine more paths for you.
Yeah, and I would say, it's you don't know where you're heading sometimes. So, you might be interested in the field and it's like, well, oh, I wish I had taken that class if I'd known. But the sooner you know, I would say, when we look at the skill sets required in a lot of jobs at a junior level or internship, they're classics that come back. So a lot of programming, maybe without surprise, right? I mean, Python, R, MATLAB, machine learning, obviously. Then you have some jobs more on the engineering side. And that's where, depending on where you're applying like for, it makes a difference, right? I mean, if you're applying for some of the very large players in the field, you'll notice that what they post is a lot more specific. If you want to be on the hardware side, on the software side, on the firmware side, on the clinical, versus going at a startup. And even within startups, is it clinical? Is it consumer based? Is it invasive? Like everything makes a difference. Some profiles required are a bit more versatile. Some of them needs to be very specialized. So it's tricky because sometimes, as Nick said, whatever whether you're undergrad, master's, or PhD, if you are interested by industry, I would encourage, for example, to go on these job boards, Ours or Else, just to see, okay, what is out there? Because maybe someone will realize, wow, the 5 jobs I love the most are clearly asking for the similar things. Maybe I should get ready for that. And that's where it could be courses, online courses. It could be just societies, student clubs, and a lot of other things. But I would say try to be kind of aware of what's out there if you already know what you're interested in.
And I guess you both have been involved in maybe hiring or you've been in industry. And as we said, take online courses. So students don't necessarily have to do traditional courses in university. Would you agree with that? Are companies okay with that?
I mean, I think it'll really depend on the company and kind of like what it is that they're looking for. And the hiring manager kind of like responsible for that job or for that company. I mean, for me personally, I definitely don't look for necessarily traditional schooling paths as being like the main way to work together.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll go with how we recruit too. So NTX services, for example, we had a call for internships at different levels. Got a lot of candidates from undergrads, masters, and PhDs, even some people with experience. And we have multi-round interviews, and we actually essentially push candidates to think even about things they might not know about commercializations of products. And it's a bit of a test about what their skill set is, and are they able to be quick on their feet and just kind of react and kind of think with us. That's how we do it. Now, with that in mind, on the Neurotech X side, we're also creating the first micro-credentials program in Neurotech. It's starting in Canada in collaborations with Queen's University, and we'll try to have it beyond, covering a lot about signal processing and introduction to neuroscience and imaging and a lot of different courses, a lot of neuroethics also. So I would say both are true, depending on the companies, like, as Nick mentioned for Neuromatch or us for NTX services. Yes, obviously biomedical engineering, neuroscience, and other relevant fields are great, but we look for a lot more because people that work with us work on, things that could be about product dev, but also about strategy, about financing, and about different, topics that are very versatile. But we're also aware that for different companies, the needs might be specific. So we are trying on the Neurotech X side, on the community, to create this micro-credential program to make it a bit more official, to say, wow, this person has actually done 5 very specific neurotech courses, hoping that this can be helpful in the industry.
Thank you so much. And hi, Dr. Cruz.
Hey there.
Here.
Yeah. Sorry for being late. I was a casualty of the cascading FAA challenges. So sorry about that.
No worries. We're happy you made it. And thank you for taking the time to be here.
Sure.
I'm going to quickly go back to the first question for you.
Sure.
Can you tell us a bit about your background, education, and career path until now? When and where did you join the BCI field, and what is your current role in the BCI or neurotech field?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started out, I have a PhD in neuroscience and did a little bit of postdocing, but really decided that I didn't want to follow the academic path. So I actually ended up first as a consultant and then as a government program manager at DARPA. And that was really, both essentially starting with my work at DARPA was the first time that I kind of started working with the BCI field, although primarily non-invasively at that point. I actually stayed in the defense industry for about a decade after that, ended up becoming a chief technology officer at a global defense company through a really fun acquisition from a software company that I was at, but then really got back into neuroscience after that. Was a co-founder at a startup called Optios doing applied neuroscience for human performance, not on the defense side, but on the commercial side. So got a little bit deeper into some of the non-invasive work. And then really kind of in the, I would say at the beginning of COVID, kind of made the transition from what I call founder to funder. And it was then that I got really deep into the BCI space, both invasive and non-invasive through investments that I made at Prime Movers Lab, and have been watching that space. I mean, I've been watching it for essentially 2 decades because fortunately, when I was at DARPA, I had a front row seat to all of the revolutionizing prosthetics work and those kind of things. So I've really been deep in, watching the space really closely for about 2 decades now, but most actively investing kind of over the last 2 to 3 years in this space, which of course has really blossomed, as you guys have probably already talked about. So
we're just getting there. So you're doing at a good time.
I know, right? Yeah. This time it's going to go, I promise. So.
Yeah. And then you all are really at the front lines of new BCI and neurotechnology developments and careers. I guess, where do you see the most opportunity happening for trainees, and what abilities do you think will be the most important? I don't know, whoever wants to start first.
I'll just say a couple words. Just wanted to say really briefly around what are the biggest opportunities. I think one of the things that's really changed dramatically over time is that it used to be, I think, kind of this dichotomy between you were either kind of in academia or maybe you were in kind of big business, right? And now I think we really have got quite a vibrant, small business startup kind of economy, that's growing. And so, the thing I'd say is that there are really a much wider range of options for trainees at this point, something that like when I would have killed to have the opportunities that folks have now, when I finished my PhD and decided I didn't want to be in academia, and it was really, is a little bit of a hunting kind of mechanism for me. Now I think there's really great opportunities. And one thing that I would emphasize is the opportunity to kind of rotate through some of those, right? So one of the things about my career that, sort of is one of those things you appreciate in retrospect, is that, hey, I've been in the government, right? I've been at a small business, I've been in a large business, I've been in a startup, and having some of those reps of those different environments, I think is really beneficial to kind of both long-term kind of figuring out what you want to do, career planning, as well as your own like personal figuring out like what resonates best with you. I think there's a certain amount of doing that has to happen in order for folks to really, kind of find their niche. So.
And I think, kind of to that point about how the field has changed, I think as fields mature, you kind of open up these opportunities to enable like specialists to interact with the field more. Whereas when they're kind of in their infancy, you end up with a lot of like generalists who are required to like master a lot of the different skill sets in the field. And so as neuroscience and neurotech like mature as a field, both with like in industry and become more established even in academia, I think there's more opportunities we're kind of in this like special blend right now where there's a lot of opportunities to kind of like interact on either of those fronts. You can come in as this like high-powered specialist who's gonna like, I don't know, like EE, like PhD, who's just gonna like work as an EE at a company, or you can come in as this like neurotech, biomedical, like generalist who can really like do a lot of good in a company or in a lab and help kind of like get those different kind of pieces to talk to each other. And so I think it's a kind of special time right now. And so in some ways, there's like more opportunity than ever, I think, to interact.
Yeah, and maybe one thing I'll add is that whether it's in an interview or if you get the position you want, I think a lot of people and at different levels, but especially younger, will focus on hard skills. Oh, I did this course, I did this thing, but like there's so much about soft skills, and soft skills evolve a lot throughout your career. I mean, if you're going to act as a CEO, it's not necessarily the same as an intern, but as an intern, coachability, personality, open-mindedness, versatility, knowing when to ask questions, knowing that it's okay, but not what to ask, how to ask. I'm just giving a few examples, but this is huge. And we see it a lot even, for ourselves. We recruit a lot of interns and analysts at different times. And I think, we end up sometimes with a lot of very strong candidates. And then it's like, well, who is going to join the team? So obviously the personality, the fit, but in a more objective way, there are also criteria for soft skills. When we ask this question, were they comfortable talking to us? How did they talk about them? Was it a lot of I? Was it a lot of we? I mean, there are many things to think about. So I would also say don't underestimate soft skills, because you might have a great GPA and have studied exactly what you need. If the fit isn't there during the interview, I don't think it's going to work either. So.
Perfect. Thank you. And as you just said, neurotechnology is a growing field, really exciting time, and is definitely going to become more popular. I guess, how can trainees make their own space and stand out, how you have all done? And how can trainees create and adapt their skill set to pursue unique career paths, or really rotate through these different career paths that were just mentioned? Since all of these lines, there's no dichotomy now, it's kind of all blending.
I kind of just want to repeat Amy's answer she just gave a second ago.
There is some overlap, but
range of exposure, I think, is so critical, not just for actually exploring what it is that you want to do and kind of like finding the area that resonates with you and how you can like contribute most, but actually for giving you that like diversity experience that lets you kind of do what innovation requires, which is like pull ideas from these different areas and see how different things have worked and like present them to the current situation that you're working in. So to Amy's point, like working in a small company, government, working in a big company, working in academia, and being able to now sit in any one company or project or whatever, and kind of seeing the different options and paths that like exist there in front of it, and how you can work within those spaces or how that company might move within those spaces is like really, really valuable. So I'd say range of exposure.
Yeah, I think sort of to that point, and maybe, thinking about the question that you asked as well, is I think it's important to encourage folks to develop their own opinions and kind of like thoughts around, and like if there's a particular area that you're excited about, even if it's not your domain of expertise, it's really like, I can't tell you the number of times it's come up when I've done interviews, or what, the team's done interviews. It's like, hey, what's something you're excited about? And having, whether it's something you're just reading, whether it's something you're commenting on and following on LinkedIn and kind of engaging in that conversation, or whether it's something maybe even as in depth as like thought leadership or a blog or something like that. I do think that there is a real value in learning to kind of communicate, have an opinion, have a position around something, because that also is kind of one of those things that I think, develops in the experiences that you have. And those are great kind of talking points to engage with others, engage with experts, engage with mentors, to kind of work around. So that would be another thing I might add, in addition to the sort of work experience piece.
Yeah, and on the work experience, I think there's a variety of ways to get a variety of experiences. So I think, as Amy, I've also had a lot of different positions in very large, smaller groups and different contexts. I mean, investments, consulting, different. At the same time, some positions are inherently provide more exposure to different things. So if I think about, what Amy does or what we do at NTX Services, from VC to consulting, by definition, for example, in those careers, you'll see a lot of different things. Now, you might also say that's not for me for different reasons, and that's okay. So different jobs might be more specific to a role, and that might be what you want. Some of them give you exposure to different things. Some of them might be more specific in terms of the role, but you might have exposure to different departments. It has to be also aligned with someone's interests, but I would say, even though there are not a million of, I would say, consulting and VC jobs in neurotech today, there are a few. So for someone that's really like, I just want to absorb everything, and I'm curious about, the business side and the technical and the science, there are a couple of opportunities. And when we interview people, for example, we do see personalities that are more aligned with that. And it takes someone that really wants to do that, very different than someone that says, hey, I studied this and I'm passionate about it. That's okay too. And that might be a bit of a different path. So people should think about how much diversity they want, and different roles have different types of diversity versus depth versus, specialization. So.
Yeah. And just even commenting on the venture investing piece, many firms have intern programs, summer, sort of thematic things that they're working on. That there's, there can be a way to get like a taste of it, without necessarily, having to say like, oh, that's the path. You can sort of sample and say, or even just, talking to the firms, seeing which ones have programs and things like that, I think is really useful. When I, made the transition to venture, I started going to like pitch days, and like I just started like watching everything and absorbing everything. And a lot of that stuff is relatively you can find it online and stuff like that. And so there's a way to kind of engage with that a little bit, get a taste of it, and see if it's interesting. Same thing with with business development, right? Being the one at a company to let's say your company has a booth at a trade show or something like that, being one of the engineers or somebody who might be a little technical, who says, hey, I want to try that, I want to go, I want to see what it's like. You might actually have an aptitude for communicating with potential customers and things like that. So I do think there's a lot of room for the exploration of those different skill sets, which can be something that folks might not even think about to start with.
Awesome. Those are really great answers. Thank you guys so much. And then I guess everyone here really has a unique perspective on building teams, or maybe being involved in startups, or really what a company needs to be successful in neurotechnology. Do you all kind of experience common themes among successful teams in neurotechnology, or maybe the members of these teams? We were talking about soft skills. And then I guess, how can trainees identify these needs to be a part of a successful team, or maybe to know that they'll be successful in these roles?
I've gone first every time, so I'm gonna let Adam go.
Sure, I'll take it, no problem. I think so. First of all, it depends on the size, on the type. I mean, if you're thinking, for example, about a a company that is starting with a, I don't know, invasive brain implant, for example, right? If you take a class 3 device, well, naturally your team will look a bit different than you're trying to go with a consumer neurotech device where you'll access market way before the other one. So first of all, let's think about what do we need as a team. Second of all, I would say we see a lot of companies that are, it depends if the founders are neuroscience or engineering background, they're different mentalities, but sometimes, they're at the comfort zone. And depending on who's surrounding them, that can also play a role. So if the CTO, CSO, and CEO, for example, all have the same background, they'll tend to think a bit of it in the same way. They might be extremely strong at something, have blind spots in other. So the plurality of perspectives and expertise is key. And that's where, again, I'm going to talk a bit about, consultants and VCs. If you get supported by advisors and or investors, then they can find those gaps and say, okay, you might be a little small to have a full-size team, but why don't we help you on this? Why don't we have an advisor for that? Maybe we should recruit someone in a role that is more on the business and strategy side. It really depends, but I would say at each stage, the plurality of expertise and perspectives will become different and more and increasingly important. So to have that balance and to know that like, hey, we might be 2 or 3 today, but I know we'll have to get different people, and the software department will have to increase in size, and I need someone in reg, but maybe I should get an advisor or a consultant first, and eventually I'll get someone in-house, just to have that plan. And essentially, maybe that's really the answer, the plan that allows you to say, okay, this is how I'm going to grow. And this is when the new expertise I don't have today will come in. Because we've seen some startups sometimes, churn a little bit in the sense that like they're doing great. And then you see the evolution. You're like, it's been a couple of years and I'm not sure the progress is as high as it can be because they're extremely strong at something, but they haven't tackled some of the other elements. Maybe they haven't even figured out what the use case might be. And it's been a couple of years because they keep working on the product. And when we ask some questions, we still don't have an answer. These are examples of, well, maybe if they had gotten someone else with that expertise or an advisor, or maybe an investor could have coached them there, maybe they would have actually dug a little bit more in that area and unlocked a lot of possibilities. So overall, make a plan, understand which expertise you'll need at different points, and make sure you don't just have too many people with the same backgrounds going in exactly the same direction, because you might have a lot of blind spots if you do that.
Yeah, I think
Oh, go ahead.
I would just say I echo the need for basically like diversity and perspective in really any company. But I think it's kind of particularly hard to achieve in early stage companies because you have so few people. Getting like that diversity of kind of like role and perspective is harder. And so when you really think about a company or any sort of project, like everything kind of needs these like certain roles. You need somebody who can promote or sell the vision of the company. You need somebody who can like take in customers and like understand them to get inputs into the company. You need somebody who can like generate or produce outputs. You need somebody who can like do the conversion between those two things. And there's like these really kind of like generalized things that you need to have. But those can be like distributed and shifted around over small groups of people. And so if you can really bring people in who have that kind of like diversity of experience and can touch on each of those things, and probably most importantly are like curious and driven by like exploring each of those things and willing to kind of like jump in and tackle them, I think that's really important in the early stages. And as the company evolves, there becomes more space for people to again have that more kind of specialized view.
Yeah, and the one thing I'd add is that I think especially if you haven't had a lot of experience on bigger teams, I think scaling can be a stressful experience for small teams that are sort of growing. And so I, just advise, especially if there's a really small team when you're starting and then you're scaling and some folks might be sort of like founders, right? But might not be, as the company grows, in the right roles. And I think there's a certain amount of maturity and flexibility that comes with, kind of knowing how to navigate those things. And definitely recommend, that's a great place for, advisors, mentors, coaches, that kind of stuff. It's not something, necessarily that everybody has to figure out themselves, but I do think it's something, especially if you join a very small team, to be prepared for, versus joining a much bigger organization, right? Where you've got, onboarding and structure and reporting mechanisms and all those things. And so I do think that, that learning, expecting some of that is useful to know as you kind of go into that kind of more innovative, small space.
So everyone has kind of been involved in deciding if they want to work with someone in this space. And I guess this is definitely job specific, but in general, what are some desirable characteristics of a partner or someone you will hire suggest for a project? Can trainees identify these skills beforehand, or how can they just not go in blind, I guess, if they are interviewing for these specific types of roles?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a little bit about the CEOs that we work with. And, especially at an early stage, there won't be probably a ton of proof yet. You're probably still a little bit in the science, a little bit in the weeds. And so we, as investors, early stage investors in particular, think very heavily about the team composition, how they interact with one another. And one thing that returns over and over is the coachability of the CEO, right? And the coachability of the team and how the team interacts with one another. And so very often, we'll do, pretty intense, conversations with the CEO to kind of understand their motivations and things like that. And we'll then also do calls with the whole team to see how the team interacts and direct questions to sort of different people and see how they hand things off. So I think that, although it might seem a bit cliche, that, it is one of the things, like it is a soft skill that people need to work on and expect to be engaged on, right? It's not all about, the technical prowess and, what the technology is. It really, I mean, like when companies fail, they typically fail because of like team stuff, not because, like really amazing smart teams can even make like crappy technology work, right? Whereas like, bad teams can kill even the best stuff. So, so that would be the thing that I would say is like, don't overemphasize on just the technical, sort of technical stuff, know that, especially as investors, we're really looking at the, the coachability and things like that a lot.
Yeah, I agree. It's really a mix. And I mean, in a way, everyone should think about that, right? If you're being interviewed, for sure the person interviewing you is thinking, okay, where are they going to fit in the team and how will that look? Like whether consciously or unconsciously, they'll be like, okay, they'll work with person A, with person B. Does that make any sense? Oh, I guess they might not work with them because they seem a bit overconfident and they might like, take a lot of room and not let the other ones talk. Whereas that other candidate was actually really strong when they answer questions, but they also listened a lot. I think that's going to be a good fit. I'm giving examples, but I mean, it is the case. Everyone will think about this. So if you have that right balance of, I'm able to sell myself, like I need to say what I know and I need to impress, but at the same time, I really need to listen and show that I'm listening. In general, people will want to kind of work with you because they say, well, this is a fit. They have the skills and then they can do it. And the skills, don't forget, if you're in the interview, in theory, you have them. So some interviews are more technical, but on paper, you've by design got in the interview. So you've at least ticked that box. And in general, at least, if the recruiting's been well done. So yes, there might be technical components, but it's really what you do during the interview. You don't need to, resell and oversell something that's already been reviewed on your resume. You can talk about it, but at some point, let the interviewer ask you what they have to ask you, essentially.
As somebody who hires people into startups frequently and has hired a lot of kind of like mid-level people too, outside of what has already been mentioned, one of the things I tend to look for is the ability to kind of like do, I guess I'd call it like transfer learning or something like that, being able to like generalize an experience you've had and see how it can apply to the situation at hand. Like that's, I think, such a critical skill set. And it's something that I think you can like practice, train, and learn. And it's something that you like need to be able to demonstrate as you interview, because it's very rare that your direct experiences are going to like directly apply to exactly what you're working in. I think that one's really critical. And then I guess I would emphasize like introspection, but I think that's maybe just like a different word for coachability. The ability to kind of like look at yourself and how you're performing and how you interact with others and try to learn from that and like take feedback on that.
And then I guess since neurotechnology is growing so rapidly, and I guess, do trainees need to keep up with innovation? And is this important when searching for a job?
In the same way, so it depends again on the positions. I'll say how we recruit people. We do have a question around what do you know about the field, right? And so it doesn't mean to be an expert, but we do want to see, I mean, is there some interest? Have they looked into this a little bit? If not, I mean, do they understand what they're getting into? So yes, there's the innovation, but it's a broader perspective. So I don't need a perfect answer, but if there's nothing there, I mean, for example, for us, right? I mean, we are advisors in Neurotech. It would be a little bit worrisome to hear like, okay, so they just applied to many jobs, and worse, they did not even prep once they got the interviews to actually show us they cared about the work we do. So it's innovation in general. I mean, look, newsletters, whether, you know, I mean, we have one, for example, but a lot of companies have their own. You should track this, social media postings, you should look at the news. There may have alerts for relevant things. I mean, there are a lot of ways to keep in touch, but I would say more broadly, yeah, I mean, just read about the field whatever way you can and make sure you can at least form some form of opinion. So, you know, it might not be right, but at least you'll show that like, hey, I like this enough to read, to know, and to have my own perspective. What we notice, to be honest, is even at more senior level, it's extremely rare that when we ask about the field, people are completely up to date. You know, people like, you know, Amy, Nick, or myself, I mean, that's all we do. We see a lot of innovation. So by definition, they'll rarely or almost never be able to kind of get to that point of, you know, currentness. But at least we can gauge, okay, they're really into this, or they've read enough that they're passionate about it. So.
I guess I'd just add that innovation doesn't always have to be purely in the kind of like end products of the field too. You can have somebody who's like really interested in innovation in their kind of like domain and can see how it applies to the field, right? Like I don't need to maybe understand, or you know, somebody I'm meeting with doesn't need to understand what the like newest neural interface is or what the status of every new neurotech startup is. But if they're like an electrical engineer who's like really interested in like what new like ASIC technologies are working, or you know, things like that, I think that's another way you can show passion and interest in it.
Yeah, you used the word that I was going to say, Nick, which was passion, right? I think it's really hard to, I mean, it's, you know, like you said, we're inundated with it every day, and there's still some things I'm like, oh, that's new. Like, you know, so I think it's really hard to have that kind of breadth. I think it's more about, you know, depth in the areas of passion and that sort of applicability and, you know, excitement. I mean, I would say some folks are a little bit more motivated perhaps by an outcome, right? Like they feel really motivated about an assistive brain computer technology, right? And they're really motivated about that, or they're really motivated around mental health. That can be a different kind of lens than like I'm motivated to apply the skill set that I had, right? So I think there are a couple of different lenses to look through that. And again, it all kind of ties together with the sort of what you're passionate about, because that really comes out. I mean, any interview, whether it's an interview with a team and you're investing, or whether it's a hiring interview, which I've done a ton of hiring too, you know, it's about passion. It's about what you've you know, what you've learned and what else you want to learn. Like, why are you here? You know, what else do you want to learn? Because there's always something to learn.
Perfect. And then this is kind of a big question. And I guess just since you are experts in BCI and neurotechnology, just to hear what you say, I think would be interesting for trainees. So why join the neurotechnology field now? And I guess, what do you think is the next big thing in neurotechnology or BCI?
Okay, well, Amy, you want to start with the tough question, or?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, why now? I mean, I think a couple of different things. One is that I think we're probably seeing more money come into the space than probably ever before, which is really good and really exciting. So I think that industry that we've all been, you know, hoping to build and building is really coming into its own. I think we are starting to see these devices really be able to be used with patients. And I think that is insanely exciting and inspiring. And I would just say, I think, you know, I really look at this space as a yes, and I don't see like, oh, there's this and it's going to win, and there's that and it's going to win. It's like, there's so much to do, and there's so many different technologies that I think I'm excited about invasive technologies. I'm excited about non-invasive technologies. I'm excited about neurostimulation. Like I'm excited, I'm excited sort of about the whole range of it. And so, it's really the breadth that makes me say kind of like now is the time to kind of get into it. And I do think that we will continue to learn as these devices, as patients gain access to these devices, we will learn so much that will just like blow our minds, and so that's for me, that's like the why now is like, you're going to be right there, as this sort of emerges. And I can't wait. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting because, people don't sometimes demystify or at least ungroup a little bit what that big category is. And I don't necessarily mean by technology, right? But I just mean if you think about the use case, the final application. So for example, there's a big difference, right, between the clinical side, the business side, or the consumer side of what, can be done in neurotech. So as Amy said, a lot more capital is in the field. I mean, just a synchron raise at 75 million was one good example. You have bigger raises, you have more raises, and I mean, there's information we publish about that. I'm sure Amy could probably give some insights there too. But overall, it's changing a lot. Now, one thing that we find really interesting, because we work with a lot of companies of different sizes, many of them at the kind of Series A stage, market access remains very complex. I mean, regulatory and reimbursement pathways, for example, for brain implants, huge questions. And, there are larger companies in the field, for example, Abbott, which recently got the FDA essentially breakthrough device pathway for depression, and other companies that are making a lot of strides are also helping for the smaller ones to say, well, you know what, by the time I'm kind of moving along my trials, I can also kind of follow that. This is helping me from a cost perspective. This is giving me clarity. But still, to this day, there are a lot of questions about how do I get my solution in patients' hands, which haven't been answered. So if you think about, am I joining a field that is, maturing, or no, the answer is, there are a lot of things that need to be solved beyond just the technology. And on the business side, if you think about business applications, there's a lot happening that people don't always know about. I mean, aerospace, automotive, beauty, sports, fashion, they're all starting to use neurotech in different fashions. So this is another trend that people don't always think about. But, if you're passionate about how can I use technologies, not on the clinical side, but just to influence other industries, there's a lot of that too. And finally, on the consumer side, I would say, I don't think it's been cracked. I think finding that balance between kind of effectiveness and accuracy of what you do with neurotech and the value add for consumers for pure consumer applications is not always clear. It doesn't mean it won't be. It just means it's another challenge to kind of figure out. So the field is evolving, but it's still quite young, but there's a lot more money in it and people understand it better. It's definitely an interesting spot to be in. So for anyone thinking about, I'm only at the undergrads, I want to continue, is there going to be room for, having impact in the next couple of years? It's a good time. I think it's a pretty good time. I think now in the next couple of years, there's going to be a lot to do, but a lot of potential too. So.
Yeah, and I think kind of extending what Amy had mentioned, like I feel like we were right on the cusp, and this is like an engineered cusp, right? The Brain Initiative had this like second phase of commercialization, and that's like basically what we're sitting on, is this like transition to the commercialization phase of huge government initiatives, like international government initiatives. And because of that, you're seeing a bunch of new neurotechnologies that are really moving into like actual usefulness. If you look, I posted a chart of like neurotech clinical trials over the years, and it's just this exponential growth curve. And so I think we're really sitting at this point where you're starting to see a lot more of those actually go into like functional use. And this is driven by like, there's external forces that are basically coalescing to make this like a great time for neurotech, right? It's miniaturization of computing and like more efficient and like power delivery and storage. And then you're combining that with like preparation of the regulatory, like additional guidances released for actually guiding how neurotechnology and kind of like navigating that gray area. And then finally, all of this being able to like actually have access to all this data, as Amy kind of mentioned, will drive new therapies forward so much faster. It's hard for us, I think, right now to even fully understand or comprehend. The field has really lacked a lot of like clinical and clinically useful neural data. And all these data scientists and computational neuroscientists are really going to be able to utilize these new like multi-sensor data recordings that we're actually getting from people acting in real life and unlock a whole new range of therapies. So I think there's a lot of room and a lot of like interest in the next steps.
I'm honestly in the postdoc slump, and all of your answers have reinvigorated my love for BCI and neurotech. So thank you guys. We are coming up on the hour, so I guess my last question is really, do all of you or any of you have last minute advice for trainees that are interested in BCI or neurotech that you don't think we've touched upon during the career panel or just in general? It's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched upon a lot. At the end of the day, I don't know if it's gonna sound redundant or cheesy or obvious. I mean, maybe all of the above, but like do what you like, right? And maybe it's a very specific thing in the field, maybe it's something else. Maybe you want to venture outside of neurotech for a little bit because you learn about hardware, you want to apply to another industry and maybe come back later. I mean, obviously, you know, Nick, Amy, and myself are gonna preach for our choir in our industry, but people need to do what they like, I think, more than anything, not what they think might be a logical path. Obviously, you know, some paths are more optimal if you have an end goal in mind, but still, I think passion, as we've all mentioned, is important. So people really need to figure out, even though it's hard, you know, what might be interesting. They can change later on, but they should at least start a job being excited by it.
I was going to say, the one thing that I think is really exciting is, you know, sort of, I was just at GPM, the healthcare conference. Obviously, you know, ARPA-H is standing up. I think there's going to be some really exciting opportunities, you know, out of that, you know, for those of us that came from DARPA, you know, and had that experience. I think that's really exciting and really excited to see what they do. Somebody had asked a question about getting, you know, government opportunities. You know, a lot of times these agencies that are starting up are a great way to, you know, kind of get a foot in the door. And I, you know, certainly over the last year, we've seen some other announcements around, you know, the NIH and NINDS really doubling down on device work and things like that. So I really do think that, from an opportunity set, you know, just want to make sure, you know, folks are looking at the kind of broader picture. That would be the only thing I might add that we haven't talked about yet. So.
Yeah, I don't think I really have anything to add. Do lots of things, meet lots of people.
Okay, that was good. Well, I wanted to thank you all for being here and taking the time to be here. This is an awesome career panel, definitely not biased, but we're so appreciative of your time. And thank you everyone attending over Zoom.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Sorry I was late. So,
No.
all right. See you
Bye,
guys soon.
everyone.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.